The following message by John Marriott was delivered at the 2014 Iron Sharpens Iron Conference at Emmaus Bible College. The title of his message is, "What is a Worldview, and Why It Does or Doesn't Matter So Much?"
You might be surprised to know that there are a whole lot of folks out there who no longer find the Christian worldview very satisfying. And not just people who you might suspect kind of were on the fringe, but there are easily between 5,000 and 10,000 testimonies of people who once identified in the pastoral ministry, who were missionaries on the field, who were Bible translators, who were seminary students, Bible college graduates, who no longer identify as Christians and who go one step further and haven't just drifted away, but actively identify as unbelievers of some sort. Atheist, perhaps anti-theist, and my research is in the process and the impact of deconversion in their life. So if that's something that you're interested in talking about, I'd be happy to dialogue with you on that and try and provide you with some answers, but it really raises more questions than it does answers. I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me to be here. I'd like to thank Janice Bennett for all of her work and her patience in waiting on outlines and all the background work that she does, the AV people. I'd like to thank President Boom. I'm not sure if he's here right now. Oh, he is. Do you notice anything special about me this morning? Does your wife? I was here at Christian Ministry Seminars, and I was having lunch together with Phil, and I said, "Hey, that's a really nice tie." And he says, "My wife hates this tie. You can have it." And he took it off. And he gave it to me right then and there. I thought about telling him how much I admire his pants, but I'm afraid his wife might not like those either, and then who knows what would happen. All right, the topic for this morning is worldview. And worldviews are ubiquitous, right? They're everywhere. The concept of worldview you can find in the Christian world just about everywhere. If you go and look at our book table, there are books on worldview. There is something called the Worldview Weekend. There's Worldview Academy. There's Worldview Summit. There are entire ministries that are dedicated to worldviews. And that's because a worldview is an incredibly important thing. So why the title? Which is coming up. There, worldview. Why it does and does not matter so much. If they're that important, then why do I say that they don't maybe matter so much? Here's why. Worldviews have characteristically been cashed out within the broader Christian world as a very cognitive, mental, propositional statements kind of a thing. And if we're going to say that worldviews are really important, then we also need to say that not just the cognitive, aware, propositional attitudes that we carry are important. We need to recognize that there are other fundamental aspects of our Constitution that really impact and affect how we live, what we think, what we do, and ultimately the kind of people that we're going to be. So an over-evaluation of the importance of the cognitive aspect of worldviews makes them maybe not matter so much, because there is a whole other part of worldview that acts almost at a pre-cognitive level or a subconscious level that really shapes us regardless of what we consciously think up here. And I see this all the time in my work with folks who have deconverted. I've spoken with about 25 people who once identified as evangelical Christians who now identify as atheists, some of whom have had impeccable Christian worldviews. Intellectually, they could tell me where they came from underneath the Christian understanding of things, who people are, what happens after you die, what's the point of life. They could lay all of those out, maybe better than many of us in this room. Some deconverted in the midst of seminary. So there's something else going on that we need to really pay attention to. And I want to situate my talk against the backdrop of what I think is the overall goal of the Christian life. And if we take a look at the overall goal of the Christian life, then I hope that I can highlight why the cognitive aspect of worldviews matter, but also raise our awareness as to why other aspects of our being matter just as much if we're going to be the kind of people that God calls us to be. And God calls us to be a certain kind of person, specifically one who is conformed or shaped into the image of His Son. So let me pray. Father, there's some people here who have come a long way, and there's people here who have come from not so long a way. And I ask that you would help me to say something of benefit to them this morning. Amen. So the goal of the Christian life, as we all know, is not just to master the Bible. We don't want to be maestros of the Bible and not have it come out in our life or shape or impact who we are as people. It's not just to know more. It's not to be able to articulate our doctrine very well or to systemize our theology, all of which are important. It's not to be able to be a great apologist and answer all of the questions and the objections that come our way, although we're called to do those things. The primary goal of the Christian life is to be conformed to the image of Jesus, Romans chapter 8, where Paul in that great chapter says that those who he foreknew, he predestined to become conformed to the image of his Son. 1 Timothy 3:16 tells us that the entire reason why Scripture was inspired and given to us was so that we might be thoroughly furnished unto every good works, a certain kind of people. 2 Peter 1 says that everything that we need has been given to us for life and godliness. Colossians chapter 3, verse 10 says, verse 9 says, "Don't lie to one another, since you have put off the deeds of the old man, and have put on the new man, who is renewed in knowledge according to the image of him who created him." And one of my favorite verses in the Bible tells us not only that we have been created in the image of God, that's the point of why, that's the goal of what we want to be. We're going to see him and we'll be like him, for we'll see him as he is. The ultimate end of God's work in our life is to conform us to the image of Christ, which is also an inherently good thing for us. In Psalm chapter 17, comparing the satisfaction that those who don't know the Lord and the hope and the meaning in life that those who don't know the Lord have in contrast to those who do, the psalmist writes this: "From men of the world who have their portion in this life and whose belly you fill with your hidden treasure, they are satisfied with children and leave the rest of their possession for their babes. But as for me, I will see your face in righteousness. I shall be satisfied when I awake in your likeness." When God created people, he created them in his image. The Septuagint translates that as icon. Right? It's a representative. It's a little sort of a mini-me. It's a expression of who God really is. And of all of the things that God is, and there's lots of things that can be unpacked or packed into the definition of what is the image of God, certainly it includes at least this: your head, the cognitive aspect; the heart, your affective and emotional level; and your hands, the practical outworkings of how you live. And so this morning, I've tried to break the discussion down underneath those three topics: the head, where we'll spend almost all of our time, and then the heart and the hands, those precognitive, subconscious elements of our constitution that actually shape and mold us in ways that we need to pay attention to and reflect on so that we can achieve the goal for which we've been called, and that is to reflect the image of Jesus. Okay, so why do worldviews matter? Worldviews matter because the Bible takes thinking seriously. The psalmist writes, "As a man thinks in his heart, so he is." As you think, so your life will go. This is an obvious conclusion that I think I don't need to belabor. But the Bible tells us that God cares about thinking. He tells the Israelites, "Come, let us reason together." Paul says that he casts down lofty ideas and any high accusation that comes against the knowledge of God. We're told that we have the mind of Christ. We're told to let this mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus. Paul debates and discusses and persuades and reasons with both the Jews and the Greeks throughout the book of Acts. God cares about the life of the mind. In the greatest commandment, we're told that we need to love the Lord our God with our heart and our soul and all our mind. We need to think well. And in thinking well, that means we need to reflect back on some of the thoughts that we have or some of the views of the world that we have. So the first reason why worldviews matter is because how we think really matters to God. The second reason why worldviews matter is that ideas have consequences. What we believe is going to affect how we live. And the third reason why is because worldview, the concept, is a corrective to the over-rationalization or the over-esteem of rationalism that comes out of the Enlightenment period. We are shaped by a history, an intellectual history and a philosophical history that most of us are just unaware of. But we have grown up in a period called modernity. Modernity is a period in time that people debate exactly when it begins and when it ends. But modernity is a period that is, you hear the word, Larry mentioned it last night, postmodernism. Well, postmodernism means we're in the period, the post period, the after period of the modern period. And the modern period is characterized by a number of things, but one of the things that it's characterized by is that there is an objective, unbiased, transcendent thing called reason that if we all just shed all of our presuppositions, if we shed all of our cultural biases, if we're reflective enough, then we can have a God's eye view of reality. And we can know things as they are, without any interpretation whatsoever. Worldviews are a corrective to that. Worldviews come out of the realization that people are situated, that people come from different cultures, that people speak different languages, that people have been born in different times and in different places, and therefore have a slightly different perspective on reality. For example, I can see only a certain perspective of this room right now because of where I'm standing. I can't see what's behind me. To see what's behind me, I have to turn around, and to turn around, I have to leave my present position. Many of you, wherever you're sitting in this room, all of you have a certain perspective. That doesn't mean that there's not a real room, and there's not real truth, and that we can't have knowledge. Larry's point last night was really one that I appreciated, that just because we don't have comprehensive knowledge, or just because our knowledge comes from a certain perspective, doesn't mean that it doesn't map onto, or is not appropriate or adequate to what reality is. But the rationalist is going to say, all of your perspectives don't matter, we can just get rid of all of those and view the world completely free of any perspective. Worldviews say no, and that's a good thing. All right, so what is a worldview? A worldview is a set of presuppositions about reality that ultimately govern how we think, what we believe, and what we do. There are lots of good definitions of worldview. Worldview is kind of a family resemblance kind of a concept. And what I mean by that is this: it's hard to define exactly what a worldview is. It's also hard to define what religion is and also what science is. But when we see science, we say, yeah, that's a scientific thing. Astrology is, astrology is not, but astronomy is. And tea leaf reading is not, but biology is. And we probably couldn't give an exact definition of why we can recognize those, but we say there's a family resemblance. People always say to me, oh, I know that, I could tell that's your son because he looks just like you. And when I ask them what do they think looks like me, they can never point it out. They can just say, oh, there's this resemblance there. Same thing with worldviews. Right? There are lots of great definitions of worldview, but it's hard to say exactly what it is. But for sure, one of the fundamental things that all definitions seem to have in common is that it is a set of presuppositions about reality. Right? So this raises the question, what is a presupposition? And a presupposition is this: it is a deeply held belief that you are very unlikely to change, and that from which your other beliefs are based on. And ultimately, it determines how you act and how you behave. Some of the presuppositions that we have, we're aware of, if we reflect a little bit. For example, everyone in this room presupposes or assumes that God exists. That doesn't mean you don't have reasons for believing that God exists, but when someone asks you why you don't do X or why you do X, usually the first reason that comes to your mind is because it's pleasing to God, or because God has said so, or because God has said not to do that. But you probably didn't go any further and then say, and then I believe in God because of this, and I believe that because of this, and this because... Right? We just kind of act out of the general assumptions that we have about life. Those are the ultimate presuppositions or the ultimate beliefs that we have. They're very unlikely to change. And for the most part, we're sometimes just unconscious and unaware of them. And at the end of the day, they're faith commitments. It's not that you can't give a reason for them, but at some point the reason giving stops. Here's an example. If someone says to me, hey, why don't you, when you go out with us, why don't you get drunk? And I say, well, I don't get drunk because I think that getting drunk wouldn't be make God very happy. He says that getting drunk is a sin. And they say, well, why do you believe in God? And I say, well, I guess I could provide you with some reasons for that. And I may run some kind of an argument that says, everything that begins to exist needs a cause. The universe had a beginning, therefore the universe needs a cause. And then they say, why do you think that everything that begins needs a cause? I don't know, I just do. Just seems reasonable to me. That's the faith commitment. And everyone's worldview, whether you're the scientist, or you're the philosopher, or you're the mathematician, ultimately rests on unprovable assumptions about reality. Job Martin should be saying amen right now. Right? Right? I won't spoil anything that he's going to say. Look, so some of these presuppositions we're aware of. And if we think about them, we can. But look, there's a whole host that let me give you some examples of ones that you have right now that you just don't think about. How about this one, that the real world exists? Did any of you get up this morning and assume that maybe it's possible that you were a butterfly dreaming that you were a person at a conference? No, you didn't. You assumed. How about the fact that your senses give you correct information about the world? How do you know that they do? The only test for your senses is your other senses. So it's a very circular argument. There are people that we know who we think their senses aren't giving them correct information about the world. Colorblind people, right? What if we were all colorblind? Right? If dogs could talk, and dogs I think are colorblind, wouldn't they just all think that, yeah, the world is sort of different shades of gray? So how do we know our senses are giving us correct interpretations of reality? Well, we assume that, and we're within our right to assume that until something comes along to take that right away from us. How about this one, that your memory is reliable? Right? Maybe some of you are saying, well, I don't assume that. But the only test for your memory really is your memory, right? Because you could have been created 5 minutes ago with a lifetime of memory, right? These are bizarre, but these are possibilities. They're also sort of like the running themes of most of the movies that your kids go to. How about this one, that other people have minds? I can prove that you have a brain, but how do I prove that you have a mind, an immaterial soul type of a thing? Maybe you're all just, I could pull my phone out right now and say, Siri, what is the weather in Dubuque? And Siri will say, it's 75 degrees and sunny. How do I know you're not all just complicated Siris? Meet computers with no consciousness, because Siri has no consciousness. I don't know that, but I assume that, and I'm well within my right to assume that. Right? So there's lots of presuppositions that we hold about reality that we don't even think about. Scientists have lots of those too, even though sometimes there's a pretense of complete objectivity, and that science is objective and based in solid empirical study and reason, unlike religious people who take everything by faith. Let me give you one example of how worldviews, we assume things about the way that we should be because of our deeply held presuppositions. I teach at a school part-time, at a high school, part-time at the university. The high school that I teach at is an international Christian school. It started out as a tiny little local school. The community that I live in, that the school is in, is profoundly Asian. The McDonald's sign does not say McDonald's on it, it's got Asian characters on it. That's how saturated the community is with Chinese and mostly Chinese, but some Korean people. The school has become international because many, many, many students want to come and get an American high school diploma so they can get into an American university. It's easier that way. And we have in our Christian school a population of near 300, and about 280 of them are atheists, and they are international Asian students. They go to Bible class every day, they go to chapel once a week, we take them on a retreat up into the mountains, we share the gospel with them, kids get saved, we baptize kids at the end of every year. Actually, there was a baptism yesterday on the campus. It's a great ministry, but it has lots of challenges because there's all kinds of intercultural conflict. Let me give you one example. We have a tremendous problem with cheating. Students will cheat. They will take pictures of things with their phone, send it to other students. They'll take pictures during tests and send it to students. They come up with really ingenious ways to cheat. They don't see it as much of a problem as we do at the school. And here's why. Because they're coming at it from a collectivist honor and shame culture. We're coming at it from an individualist, right and wrong, sort of justice kind of culture. Right? They don't think that cheating is right, but it is better to cheat and pass than it is to fail honestly and bring shame to your family. Where we think, no, it's better to be honest and fail and take your consequences than it is to cheat. We're not so much concerned about honor or shame being transferred to our extended family. We bear the burden because we're the individualist society, right? We're the rugged individualists. But for them, cheating is a better thing to do. They don't think that it's right, but it is better than bringing shame. Where we say, no, it's a big deal. They have a hard time understanding why we care so much about it. We have a hard time understanding why they don't understand that it's wrong to cheat as much as we think that it is. The reason why is because we are fundamentally shaped by different ways of viewing the world. And because of that, we weigh these issues differently. Let me give you a couple analogies. Well, three actually. Worldviews are like glasses. So I wear these glasses now because I got poked in the eye. I was setting up a zip line for my kids in the backyard, and I was climbing a tree, and I got poked in the eye with a stick. And so I think it kind of caused I see things a little bit differently in this eye here. But these glasses kind of correct that. And glasses and worldviews are similar. Worldviews are like lenses that you see the world through. If your prescription is a really bad prescription, if I was to trade glasses with some of you, it wouldn't help clarify the world for you. It would probably make the world fuzzier for you and me if we switch glasses. I do an experiment with my high school students where I give them a pair of glasses that allows them to see the world upside down. And then I ask them to perform certain tasks and to catch basketballs that I throw them and to write their name on the board. And they have such a hard time doing it, and we all laugh at them. But the point that I think that it gets across is that if the lenses that you're wearing physically and cause you to interpret and see the world a certain way are bad lenses, then you will go around bumping into things all the time. They don't help you. Worldviews are like glasses that are cemented to your face, and they cause you to see the world in a certain way. For example, when I look out the window, I see the creation of God. I see His handiwork. Because of that, perhaps I treat it in a certain way and causes my behavior to change. As a naturalist, someone who doesn't believe in God, I don't look out at the world and I don't see it as the creation of God. I see it ultimately as the product of evolution. Same thing with looking at all of you here in the audience. So worldviews are like glasses. They're also like maps. But they're not physical maps. They're more like maps that we carry around in our mind. They're metaphysical maps of reality. They tell us how many genders there are in the world. They tell us what justice looks like. They tell us what we think the good life looks like, what a family should be. Right? They're not physical maps, but they're metaphysical maps beyond the physical that explain to us and categorize and carve up the world for us in a whole that we try and hope is very coherent and makes a lot of sense. But for most, worldviews are really a story. It's the story that we live by. And I would suspect that if I was to ask many of you in here what your worldview is, you wouldn't be able to give me 7 answers to 7 propositional statements, but it would probably start off, as I believe that there's a God and that he created people, and you would go on and you would tell me the story of the gospel and the creation, the fall, the redemption, and the kingdom. That story is a story that we, because we're believers, find ourselves in and that we've accepted and that we live our life by. And that story shapes us into a certain kind of people. But not everyone, of course, shares that same story. And we live in a world that has competing stories, competing worldviews. So who has a worldview? Well, everybody has a worldview. The fact that you're a human being means that you have a worldview. Being human means to be part of a community, part of a culture, to speak a language, to be situated at a time and at a place. I think it's pretty obvious that if we were born in Papua New Guinea 500 years ago, we wouldn't see the world the way that we see it today. We would have a different worldview, but we would still have a worldview. There isn't anyone who doesn't have a worldview. Now, most worldviews that people have are fairly inconsistent. Not too many folks pick up a textbook in philosophy or think through things systematically, but most worldview beliefs that we have are more of a salad bar approach. We like this, I kind of like that, this is appealing to me, I like that. And then when you start to dig a little bit deeper and ask, well, why do you believe these things? Because they don't seem to stick together very well. Most folks go, yeah, I never really thought about that. I'll give you an example. In Los Angeles, where you might not be surprised to see this, I was behind this really big Escalade, Cadillac Escalade, beautiful SUV. And the license plate said, high maintenance. Okay, do you know what that means, right? High maintenance? It's a derogatory term usually used, that men use about women, say, oh, she's so high maintenance. She needs a lot. She needs things. Now, around the outside of the license plate holder said this, not of this world. Okay, maybe I'll explain that to you. Not of this world, right? It's the biblical phrase. We're not of this world. We're of a different kingdom. Abraham and everybody else in chapter 11 of Hebrews sought another kingdom, not this one here. Right? Being not of this world and being high maintenance are completely opposite concepts of one another. But somehow in this lady's mind, they came together quite well, that she could be not of this world and she could be high maintenance at the same time, which is like saying, I'm not of this world and I am of this world at the same time and in the same way. A lot of people try, though, and hold their worldviews together consistently, but if their worldview is problematic at the presuppositional level, they're going to have all kinds of other problems when it creeps out to the more surface level beliefs and their actions. I spoke at a university in Canada once, and it was to a room about this large with about this many folks in the student union on the meaning of life. My argument was, without God, there's no ultimate meaning to life. Afterwards, a student came up to me and said, hey, I just want to say, don't you think that it's possible that if there's no God, that the universe could provide you ultimate meaning in life? So I asked him this question. I said, so if the universe is all that exists, that would mean that all that there is inside of the universe, which is all physical, material stuff, right? Correct. There are no souls, right? Correct. If there are no souls and everything is physical, then your brain is all that's going on in your head, your physical brain. Correct. But if your brain is a physical thing, then it operates according to the laws of physics and chemistry in the exact same way that if I were to drop this Bible on the ground, it would fall to the ground because it has no free will and no choice. It is just doing what the laws of physics and chemistry demand that it do. So I laid that out for him, and he said, yeah, that's right. What goes on in your brain is just a matter of being causally determined by other forces, like the laws of nature, your socio-cultural background, your genes, those kinds of things. I said, okay, so can there be any free will? He said, no, there's no such thing as free will, because there can't be if you're causally determined, right? One domino knocks over the other domino knocks over. So you're not making choices because you want to make choices. You might think that you are, but you're deceived. You're actually just doing what your brain is forcing you to do, which is being forced by the laws of chemistry and physics and the electrochemical synapses taking place in your brain. I said, if there is no such thing as free will, then is there any such thing as real morality? And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, how do you hold someone morally accountable for what they've done if they had no choice in doing it? Does that not seem like a fundamental element of being moral or being responsible, is that you chose to do it? If I hypnotized you and said, go tickle Phil Boom, you wouldn't get in trouble for doing that once it came out that you were hypnotized and you had no choice in doing it. Now, if you did it on your own, then probably there would be some repercussions. Right? So he said, yeah, that's right. There's no such thing as morality. I said, how do you hold people accountable? What about justice? And he said, well, and this is where it started to get weird. He said, well, because we've evolved and it's been this determined kind of thing, there's a majority of us who have brains who have evolved this way and who see these actions as being wrong and immoral, and a minority of people who have evolved this way and see these actions as being okay. And so since there are more of us than there is of them, that we can put them in jail and hold them responsible when they do bad things. And I said, so right and wrong then is ultimately just whoever has the most power. And he said, well, yeah, I guess kind of. And then I said, so what you're telling me is there's no such thing as justice, there's no such thing as real morality, and no such thing as real right and wrong. And he said, well, and then I said, here's an example. And I gave him a horrific example of something that had happened in the news about a young girl who had been abducted and abused and actually buried alive. And I said, would you look at her parents and would you tell them that what this man did to their daughter was not truly morally wrong and that he didn't really choose to do it and he's not really morally responsible because he was just dancing to his DNA? And he said, well, no, I guess I would say that was really wrong. And I said, okay, why? And he said, because if everyone went around killing everyone else, the gross domestic product of the United States would drop significantly. Right? So, you can be consistent, and he was consistent, but he started off with such terrible assumptions and presuppositions about reality that to be consistent, he had to go to extremes that we would all say border on perhaps delusional. So who has a worldview? Everyone does. Oftentimes we don't think about them, oftentimes they're inconsistent, and oftentimes when they are consistent, because of the presuppositions they start with, they end up in places that we don't really want to go. Right, well, what questions do worldviews answer? They answer questions like this: what is ultimate reality? Not everybody answers this the same. Hindus will say it's Brahman. Naturalists will say that it's just matter. Scientologists will tell you that it's space aliens. I'm not making a joke there. Maybe they would say it's matter. Who are we? Well, are we Atmans that need to get back to Brahman if you're a Hindu? Are we streams of consciousness if you're a Buddhist? Are we created in the image and likeness of God if you're a Christian? Are we the products of natural selection working on mutations that are beneficial over time if you're a naturalist? We all answer that question differently. What's the good life? What do we want out of life? We all want to be happy. That goes without saying, because just about everything we do is for our own happiness. Now, that's not a bad thing. That's not a hedonistically evil kind of thing. But if you think about it, at the end of the day, no one wants to be happy so they can get more money, and no one wants to be happy so they can go on vacation. We go on vacation because we want to be happy, and we want more money because we think that it's going to be happy. And just about all of the things that we do are motivated for our own well-being. You came here this weekend because you wanted to, because you thought that it would maybe provide you with some ability or some new knowledge or some skills and tools. Why? Because you want to be a certain kind of a person. Why? Because you think that's what God wants you to be, and what God wants you to be is ultimately best for you. At the end of the day, just about everything that we do is for human flourishing, and that is not a bad thing. Jesus appeals to this all the time in the Gospels when he says things like, if you come and you eat of me, you'll never be hungry again. I have the water of eternal life, that if anyone drinks of it, neither will they ever thirst again. Jesus appeals to this part of us that says that we intuitively know that we have been created for something, and that we have a purpose to fulfill, a telos that is dragging us forward. So who are we? And what is the good life? What's wrong? Why aren't we achieving the good life? Everybody in every religion has an answer to this question, and that is, what is the solution? Worldviews differ on this all the time. So worldviews answer these questions and maybe a few more. But few of us really think about worldviews in this matter. And as I teach my class at school about the worldview of naturalism or polytheism or pantheism or theism or maybe postmodernism, I also recognize that those are just kind of constructs. Those are just titles that we've given to various broad ways of looking at the world. But you hardly ever find a theist. You find Christians, you find Jews, you find Muslims, but you generally don't find theists. Therefore, to say that theists believe this, and naturalists believe this, and polytheists believe this, is an overgeneralization and is a very broad brush. But worldviews are big things. They're not personal things. They are things that you have as part of a community. And therefore, there are generally things that we can say that are true. So naturalists will generally, a naturalist is someone who believes everything is natural, there's no God. We'll answer these questions fairly similarly. Polytheists, fairly similarly. But there will be different mindsets within those. Okay, so the question is then why do they matter so much? And I think it's probably obvious by now, but I would like to give you some examples of why these really matter so much. And that's because they set the coordinates of our life, and they fundamentally shape who we are. Theology. Your worldview, your deeply held assumptions will affect your theology. None of us pick up the Bible and just read it as it is without a whole lot of influence, lenses, and theology behind us. That's not a bad thing. When we talk about orthodoxy, we should be reading the Bible with orthodoxy in mind, along with the great tradition of the way that the church has read the Bible. Calvin and Luther in the Reformation, who are the big guys of saying, get back to the Bible, get back to the Bible, get back to the Bible, didn't just give everybody a Bible because they knew that that would be problematic. They wanted them to be able to read the Bible in the correct way, according to the community, the tradition, the great tradition of the church. That's why Luther wouldn't even let anybody who hadn't gone through a catechist, who was probably over 13, even read the Bible because he didn't feel they were instructed correctly on it, and they would become a heretic. Likewise, Calvin wrote not only his institutes for pastors, but he wrote a lot of sermons and wrote them out for lay folk to be able to have a guide in studying and knowing the Bible. So your theology is impacted by your worldview. I've been following a guy on the internet. He's a well-known Christian philosopher, and he has been dialoguing with folks on the issue of the genocides in the Old Testament. If you've ever read those and thought through the problem, it's a thorny problem, it's a tough problem. It's really hard to piece together how God, who tells us that we should love our enemies in the New Testament in the person of Jesus, commands the Israelites to do the mass genocide, I will use that term lightly in quotation marks, by the way, of the ancient Amalekites and the Canaanites, etc. I don't mean to cast any dispersions on that. I want you to hear me clearly. I think we need to honor the Bible. We need to trust the Bible. We need to take those passages meaningfully. But that's because I have a presupposition about what the nature of the Bible is. One of the gentlemen who I've been reading recently, because I've been thinking a lot about this, is a Christian philosopher who is evangelical and sound in every way, except he has a presupposition and an assumption that probably some of us wouldn't share, and it would be this. His understanding of goodness and justice and virtue are such that it causes him to read those passages in the Old Testament in a way that he says are not literal. He's going to say that this is a record at this point in the Bible of folks who got it wrong. And God allowed that passage to be kept in the Bible and their error to stand as a counterexample of what his character is truly like. And he'll say this, because in his mind, what it means to be good, his presupposition of what it means to be good, what it means to be just, what it means for God to be holy, does not fit with God saying wipe everybody out. His assumptions, his philosophical presuppositions about those concepts affect his theology. And they affect yours too. And they affect mine as well. Everybody in here who's a Calvinist has an assumption about what sovereignty must mean, and everybody in here who's an Arminian has an assumption of what free will demands. And we bring those to the text. The text sometimes causes us to switch sides, but they're always operating in the background. How about politics? Right? The assumptions that we have, the presuppositions that we carry, play out in politics all the time. Dennis Prager, who's a conservative columnist and radio host, has a theory that I think is kind of interesting, and he says this: the fundamental presupposition of conservatism, those on the right, more Republicans, is liberty. The fundamental presuppositions of those on the left is equality. And it is out of those two presuppositions that they come to form more surface level beliefs that therefore they try and enact in policy. I'll give you a quick example. In the state of Arizona, they have been trying to pass a bill that just was shot down by the governor that said that people have the right to refuse service based on certain criteria. One of those is sexual orientation, because there's been a number of cases in the United States recently where where a homosexual couple was asked, a baker, a florist, and a photographer in 3 separate occasions to participate in their wedding. And on religious conviction, they said, no, we can't do that. And the state of Arizona, and all 3 of the Christians in those cases lost. They were all found in discrimination. They were discriminating against these folks. The state of Arizona said, we don't want that to happen here. We want people to have the right to say we will not support or provide services for an event, a celebration of a particular thing that goes against our religious beliefs. Well, that's because they are more conservative, and their fundamental presupposition is that people should have the liberty to live as they want. But those on the other side said, no, this is fundamentally wrong because it is denying people equality, and people will be discriminated against. And so we see it as an argument that's way up here about religious freedom and whether or not this is bigotry. But at the end of the day, it's a fundamental presupposition that needs to get discussed. And that is, what's more fundamental? Your liberty or equality? And that's a debate, of course, that we can't settle here. You might be surprised at this, but math is an objective science. 2 + 2 is 4. But what a 2 is and what a 4 is and what a plus means and all of the things that go into that are debated amongst mathematicians. There are absolutists, and then there are people who are called fallibilists, and then amongst the absolutists there are people who are Platonists, then there are empiricists, there are logicians, there are scientific language folks, all who debate and argue whether or not numbers exist, whether they're real, whether they're true. And this impacts how they teach. Here's an example. This is a quote by Stephen Bishop from Soundwell College in the UK. He says, an absolutist math teacher may well teach by emphasizing routine mathematical tasks and give the expectation that there is one correct answer. The fallibilist math teacher may well emphasize the collaborative, problem-solving, investigational approach to math. How we view math affects how we teach, of course. But this is not the only influence upon teaching styles. A math absolutist may well have a different pedagogy than the fallibilists. 2 + 2 may equal 4, but the issue is whose concept of 2 and whose concept of plus and equals are we using? If you're interested in finding out the debate that goes on at that level amongst folks in the math departments of your universities, I could direct you to some articles. But even your fundamental presuppositions will impact how you go about teaching math. Now, other than math, physics is probably the most deterministic, objective science that there is. But atomic theory, which says that things are made up out of atoms, and atoms, are these tiny little things that you can't really see, and they may have some people debate actually what those are. And that impacts the science that goes on. And that's because of the fundamental presuppositions that they bring to the table. Here are 3 names that maybe you've heard before. Ernst Mach. Have you heard of Mach 1, Mach 2, Mach 3, the speed of sound that planes go? Okay. Ernst Mach was a physicist. Werner Heisenberg is a very famous physicist. And Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein, Werner Heisenberg, and and Mach all believed in atomic theory, which says that everything is comprised of little atoms. They all disagreed actually on what an atom was, though. Mach said that they didn't actually exist, or at least we could have no reason to believe that they exist, because he didn't actually believe that a physical world existed. Yeah. Yeah. He kind of thought that everything was kind of just a projection inside of our heads. Werner Heisenberg said, no, you're wrong. There's a real external world out there, but actually atoms are nothing more than mathematical formulations. So atoms, at the end of the day, are energy formulated by mathematical numbers. And Einstein said, you're both crazy. There's a real world, and there are real physical atoms out there. What they believed impacted how they did science. Mach never would have found neutrinos and other subatomic particles because he didn't think that they were out there. He didn't think that they existed. But they have found those things. And part of the reason why we have the internet today and the way that information is transferred so quickly is because of science has gone down the road following Einstein and Heisenberg more than they've gone down the road of following Mach. But those are all shared and shaped by their presuppositions. We're running out of time. How about I just give you this last one? It affects your view of the law. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to speak at a Bible camp that's very familiar to probably many of you here. They had too many kids at the camp, so they sent me up to stay at a bed and breakfast on the north end of the lake. Bed and breakfast was run by a guy who was a former military guy. He was a lieutenant colonel. And I only know that because I happened to walk by his office and he had all kinds of regalia on the wall, handshakings with presidents and plaques and pictures and you name it. It was unbelievable. His uniform was hanging up. And I said, hey, what branch of the service were you? And he said, well, I was in the Air Force. I said, oh, did you fly a plane? And he said, no, I was a judge advocate general. Right? That's the guy who goes around from base to base prosecuting crimes that military people commit. And I said, oh, that's probably an interesting job. He said, it was. My responsibility was from Qatar to London. And he said, but the most exciting part of my career came when I moved to Washington and I became the head legal counsel for the Joint Chief of Staff of the United States military, and I worked out of the Pentagon. Right? Here's the president. Here's the Joint Chief of Staff. Here are all the Joint Chiefs of all the branches of the military. He's the head legal counsel to the Joint Chief of Staff who answers directly to the president. I said, that must have been amazing. And I started doing the math in my head, and I said, were you there on 9/11 when the plane crashed in the building? He said, I was. And he told me all about all the things that went on. And then I asked him, so do you think that there really were weapons of mass destruction there? And he said, at the time, I thought that we did. Then I asked him this question. I said, so Pete, do you think that there's such a thing as natural law? Natural law and positive law are two different kinds of law. Natural law is the law that exists out there in reality. Positive law is law that we create. An example of natural law would be like if you jump off the building, one of the outcomes is going to be you're going to get hurt because gravity is a natural law and the consequences flow naturally out of the law of gravity. If you go speeding down the road 10 years ago, you probably are not going to get the same speeding ticket that you're going to get today because speeds change and ticket prices change. That's a positive law. The consequences, the laws are made and the consequences are arbitrary. I said, Pete, do you believe in natural law or just positive law? Because many legal theorists say there is no such thing as natural law. The whole we hold these truths to be self-evident, that's not a self-evident truth. That's not a natural law, that all men are created equal. That's a positive law that we all agree on. I said, so do you believe in natural law or positive law? He said, I believe in natural law. And he said, if I didn't, how could I say what was going on in Iraq was wrong and what we were going to do was really right? And I forgot to mention that he said this. I said, what did you have to do with the Iraq invasion? He said, I was the man and my legal team gave the President of the United States the legal go-ahead to pull the trigger on Saddam Hussein on international grounds. So here's the man who had a major part in giving the green light to the president to go to war against Iraq. I said, do you believe in natural law? He said, yes. I said, where do you think natural law comes from? Why do you think that there is a real right and a real wrong? This moral law that weighs down upon us that you think is being violated in Iraq. He said, I have no idea. I haven't thought about that since law school. I went to the camp, did my speaking, came back that night. He said to me, "Your question is really bothering me. I'm going to think about it some more." I woke up in the morning, he was making breakfast. He said, "I thought about your question." He said, "Here's my answer. We went to war." That's not what my question was, but we went to war because the dignity of human beings was being violated. And before I had a chance to open my mouth, he said, "But I guess that raises the question, doesn't it? Where does human dignity come from?" He had these fundamental presuppositions. There is a natural law, there is a real right, there is a real wrong, there is a real morality woven into the fabric of reality. And that people have dignity. And it affected, significantly, the world. He had no foundation for it. Why don't they matter so much? Well, you'll have to wait till tonight. Because it's 10:32 and I don't want to take up any more time. But we'll come back tonight. I'll address why they don't maybe matter so much after all that I've said. And then we'll talk about what the topic for tonight is. So thank you very much. Let me just close in prayer and then you're dismissed. God, thank you for this time that we've had together. I hope that it's been beneficial for folks. And would you bless them throughout the rest of their day. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.